The power went out at exactly 2:30 in the morning, and I knew I was the only person in Meadowbrook Estates who wouldn't lose a week's worth of food from my freezer, because I'd bought a generator last month. My name is James Anderson, and I'd lived in this upscale neighborhood just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, for 3 years. The community was one of those planned developments with pristine lawns, cookie-cutter houses in 3 approved color schemes, and an HOA that treated the covenant rules like they were the 10 Commandments handed down from on high. I'd learned to deal with most of their nonsense, the complaints about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall or my trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes past pickup time. But this situation was about to become something else entirely. When I bought my house, the previous owner had warned me about the HOA president, a woman named Deborah Patterson. "She's got nothing better to do than police the neighborhood," he'd said with a weary shake of his head. I'd laughed it off at the time, thinking he was exaggerating. He wasn't. The morning after that power outage, I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice stuck to my front door. My generator had been running all night, keeping my refrigerator, freezer, and a few essential circuits alive. The notice stated that I was in violation of community noise ordinances and needed to appear before the HOA board at their next meeting in 3 days. I crumpled the notice in my fist and went inside to make coffee. My generator was a mid-range model, nothing fancy, but it did put out about 75 decibels when running. Apparently, that was 75 decibels too many for Deborah and her cronies. 3 days later, I sat in the community center's main room, which the HOA used for their monthly meetings. The space always smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaner. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a long table where Deborah sat flanked by the other board members. She was a woman in her mid-50s with that particular hairstyle that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Mr. Anderson," she began, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that only comes from years of petty power. "We're here to discuss the disturbance you created on the night of October 15th. You mean the night I kept my food from spoiling during a 12-hour power outage?" I asked, keeping my voice level. A man to Deborah's left, Harold something or other, cleared his throat. "The noise from your generator was reported by 6 different households. It was disruptive and, according to our community guidelines, constitutes a noise violation." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I actually measured it. My generator runs at about 75 decibels from my property line. That's about as loud as a vacuum cleaner. Deborah's lips pressed into a thin line. Nevertheless, it was a disturbance. "We're implementing a new rule, effective immediately. No generators exceeding 65 decibels will be permitted to operate within Meadowbrook Estates." 65 decibels, I said. "That's absurdly low. Most generators run between 70 and 90. "Then perhaps you should invest in a quieter model," Deborah said, her tone suggesting this conversation was over. "The new rule will be added to the covenant. You have 30 days to comply or face daily fines of $100. I wanted to argue, to point out how ridiculous this was, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The HOA board had absolute power when it came to these decisions, and fighting them would mean expensive legal fees with no guarantee of success. Instead, I just nodded and left. Back home, I did what any reasonable person would do. I researched. I spent hours reading reviews, watching comparison videos, and learning everything I could about quiet generators. The technology had come a long way in recent years. Inverter generators, with their variable engine speeds and sound dampening enclosures, could run as quietly as 50 to 60 decibels. I found a top-of-the-line model that advertised 53 decibels at quarter load and 62 at full load. It cost nearly $3,000, which made me want to punch a wall, but I ordered it anyway. If Deborah wanted quiet, I'd give her quiet. The generator arrived a week later in a massive box. I spent a Saturday afternoon setting it up, running the proper connections and testing it out. My neighbor to the right, an older guy named Tom who'd always been friendly, came over while I was working. "New generator?" he asked. "Yeah, had to get one that meets the new decibel requirements," I said. Tom frowned. "What new requirements?" I explained the HOA's decision. His frown deepened. "That's strange," he said. "I've got a generator too. Bought it after that big ice storm 2 years ago knocked power out for a week. Nobody ever said anything about noise levels." "You didn't get a notice?" He shook his head. "Haven't heard a thing from the HOA about it." A suspicious thought formed in my mind. "When's the last time you ran it?" "Not since last winter, I guess. We haven't had any outages lately, knock on wood." I filed that information away and finished setting up my new generator. When I tested it, the difference was remarkable. Even standing right next to it, the noise was minimal, a gentle hum rather than the aggressive rumble of my old model. From inside my house, I could barely hear it at all. 2 weeks passed without incident. Then another storm rolled through Charlotte, this one predicted to be severe. The Weather Service issued warnings about possible tornado activity and widespread power outages. I made sure my new generator was fueled and ready to go. The storm hit hard around 8 in the evening. Rain lashed the windows, wind howled through the trees, and right on schedule the power went out. I started up my generator and settled in to wait out the storm. Around 9, my phone rang. It was Tom. "Hey James, sorry to bother you, but my generator won't start. I think the carburetor's gummed up from sitting too long. Any chance I could run an extension cord to your place for my refrigerator?" "Sure, come on over." Tom showed up a few minutes later, drenched despite the short walk between our houses, carrying a heavy-duty extension cord. We got his refrigerator hooked up and I offered him a beer. We sat in my kitchen, listening to the storm rage outside. "This is a nice setup you've got," Tom said. "Can barely hear the thing running." $3,000 worth of nice," I said with a grimace. "That's criminal. The HOA's got too much power around here." "You're not wrong." We chatted for a while longer before Tom headed home. I went to bed around 11, the quiet hum of the generator almost soothing as I fell asleep. The next morning brought a surprise. The power was still out, which wasn't unexpected, but what caught my attention was the noise. Specifically, someone else's generator, roaring loud enough that I could hear it clearly over my own whisper-quiet unit. I walked outside to investigate. The sound was coming from somewhere down the street. I followed it on foot, curious. 3 houses down, on the corner lot with the elaborate fountain out front, a generator chugged away at what had to be 80 or 90 decibels. I recognized the house immediately. It belonged to Deborah Patterson. I stood there for a moment, taking this in. The HOA president, the woman who'd forced me to spend $3,000 on a quiet generator, was running one that was significantly louder than my original model. I pulled out my phone and used a decibel meter app I'd downloaded. Standing at the edge of her property, the reading showed 87 decibels. I took a screenshot, then another, then a short video showing both the generator and the reading. As I was doing this, another neighbor walked by, a woman named Rachel who lived across from Deborah. "Awful, isn't it?" she said, having to raise her voice over the generator's roar. "Been going since last night. I could barely sleep." "Has she always had that generator?" "Oh yeah, for years. She runs it every time the power goes out." Usually they're pretty good about getting things back up quickly, but this looks like it might be a while. I thanked her and walked back home, my mind racing. This was interesting, very interesting. I spent the morning documenting. I took decibel readings from multiple points around Deborah's property. I photographed her generator. I even found the model number and looked up its specifications online. According to the manufacturer, it ran at 89 decibels at full load. Then I checked the HOA's website and downloaded a copy of the new noise ordinance. It was very clear. No generators exceeding 65 decibels. No exceptions listed. I drafted an email to the HOA board, attaching all my documentation. Dear board members, I wanted to bring to your attention a violation of the recently implemented generator noise ordinance. The attached photos and measurements show that the generator at 1847 Meadowbrook Lane, the residence of Board President Deborah Patterson, is operating at approximately 87 decibels, well above the 65 decibel limit. I trust this will be addressed with the same urgency as my own violation was handled. Sincerely, James Anderson. I hit send and sat back, wondering what would happen next. The response came within an hour, but not from who I expected. Harold, the board member who'd backed up Deborah at my hearing, called my cell phone. Mr. Anderson, this is Harold Morrison from the HOA board. I received your email. And he cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, you see, Mrs. Patterson's generator was, grandfathered in. The new ordinance only applies to new installations. Interesting, I said. Because that's not what the ordinance says. I'm looking at it right now. There's no mention of grandfathering. It was, implied. So when you told me I had 30 days to comply or face daily fines, was it implied that my generator was also grandfathered in? Silence. Here's the thing, Harold. Either the rule applies to everyone or it doesn't apply at all. You can't have it both ways. Mr. Anderson, please be reasonable. I spent $3,000 to be reasonable. Now it's Deborah's turn. I hung up. Over the next few hours. I received 2 more calls and several emails, all trying to explain why Deborah's generator was somehow exempt from the rules she'd created. I ignored most of them. Instead, I started digging deeper into HOA law in North Carolina. What I found was fascinating. HOAs had broad authority, but they weren't above the law. They had to follow their own rules consistently and couldn't apply them selectively. If they did, homeowners could challenge their actions. I also found something else. The HOA had a requirement to hold open meetings and allow homeowner input before implementing new rules. Our board had bypassed that entirely. They just declared the new generator policy without any discussion or vote from the community. The power came back on late that afternoon. Deborah's generator finally shut off, and the neighborhood returned to its usual quiet. But I wasn't done. I spent the next week reaching out to other homeowners. I started with Tom, then talked to Rachel, and gradually built a network of people who were frustrated with the HOA's overreach. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been hit with petty violations and arbitrary rules. A guy named Marcus, who lived 2 streets over, had been fined for parking his work truck in his driveway. It was a regular pickup, not even a commercial vehicle, but Deborah had decided it was unsightly. A young couple, the Hendersons, had been cited for having the wrong shade of white paint on their shutters. They'd had to repaint the entire house at a cost of $8,000. An elderly woman named Grace had been threatened with liens against her property because her flower garden extended 6 inches beyond the approved boundary. The stories went on and on. Deborah ran Meadowbrook Estates like her personal fiefdom, and the other board members were too scared or too complicit to stop her. I organized a meeting at my house. 15 homeowners showed up, all of them with grievances. We talked about our options. We could recall the board, Marcus suggested. The bylaws allow for it if we get enough signatures. How many? Someone asked. I'd already looked this up. 40% of homeowners need to sign a petition. There are 230 homes in Meadowbrook, so we need 92 signatures. That's a lot, Grace said quietly. But doable, Rachel countered. Especially if we all split up the neighborhood and canvass. I bet there are plenty of people who feel the same way we do, but just haven't spoken up. We agreed to try. Over the next 2 weeks, we went door to door. The response was overwhelming. People were tired of Deborah's tyranny. We got our 92 signatures in 10 days and submitted them to the HOA board. Deborah's response was swift and predictable. She claimed the petition was invalid, citing various technicalities. The font was wrong. The wording wasn't exact. Some signatures weren't dated properly. I'd anticipated this. I'd had a lawyer friend review our petition before we submitted it. Everything was correct, but Deborah wasn't interested in what was correct. She was interested in maintaining power. That's when I decided to attend the next HOA meeting with the 15 other homeowners from my group. We filed in and took seats in the front rows. Deborah's eyes narrowed when she saw us. "This meeting will come to order," she said, banging a gavel. "We have several items on the agenda." "We have an item to add," I said, standing up. "The recall petition. That petition has been deemed invalid and will not be discussed." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I said so, Mr. Anderson. Now sit down or I'll have you removed." I didn't sit. You can't ignore a valid petition signed by 40% of homeowners. That's not how this works. I am the president of this board and I determine what gets discussed. Your petition had numerous irregularities and is therefore void. Marcus stood up beside me. "Then we'll file another one. And another one after that. We're not going away." Deborah's face flushed red. "This meeting is adjourned." She gathered her papers and stalked out, the other board members trailing behind her like confused ducklings. We didn't leave, though. We stayed in that community center and held our own meeting. We elected temporary leadership, me as spokesperson, Rachel as secretary, and Marcus as treasurer. Then we started planning our next moves. The following week, Deborah sent out a mass email to all homeowners. It was full of accusations about how a small group of malcontents was trying to destroy the community. She claimed we wanted to turn Meadowbrook Estates into a slum with no standards or rules. It was such obvious fear-mongering that it actually helped our cause. More people reached out to us, wanting to know the truth. We held another meeting, this time at the community center, and over 50 people attended. I explained what we were really after, not an end to all rules, but fair and consistent application of reasonable ones. "Nobody cares if someone's grass is an inch too tall," I said. "Nobody wants to fine a widow because her flower garden is 6 inches over an arbitrary line. We want an HOA that maintains property values without making our lives miserable." The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. We filed a second petition. This time, we got 140 signatures, well over the required threshold. We also hired a lawyer, pooling money from interested homeowners, to make sure everything was bulletproof. Deborah tried the same tactics, claiming invalidity, but our lawyer shut that down with a letter threatening legal action. The board was required by law to hold a recall vote within 30 days. During those 30 days, things got ugly. Deborah and her supporters, a small group of about a dozen homeowners who benefited from her selective rule enforcement, launched a campaign against us. They sent emails, left flyers on doors, and even confronted some of our supporters directly. Grace called me one evening, her voice shaking. Deborah came to my house today. She said if the recall goes through, the new board will probably raise fees to cover legal costs, and I might lose my home. That's a lie, Grace. We have no intention of raising fees. If anything, we'll lower them once we stop wasting money on frivolous violations. I know, but she was so aggressive, I've never seen her like that. I reassured Grace as best I could, but the incident bothered me. Deborah was getting desperate, and desperate people did stupid things. The recall vote was scheduled for a Saturday morning. We arranged for electronic voting to make it easier for everyone, with a backup paper ballot system. The turnout was incredible. Nearly 90% of homeowners voted. The results were decisive. Deborah and the entire board were recalled by a margin of 73%. We'd won. I expected Deborah to accept defeat gracefully, or at least quietly. Instead, she showed up at my house the next morning. "You've made a huge mistake," she said when I opened the door. "This neighborhood will fall apart without proper leadership." "We'll have proper leadership," I said. "It just won't be you. You think you can do better. You've only lived here 3 years. I've been president for 8. And in those 8 years, you've alienated most of the community and cost homeowners thousands of dollars in unnecessary expenses. Yeah, I think we can do better." Her face contorted with rage. "I'll fight this. I'll sue. I'll make sure you regret ever moving here. Deborah, it's over. Just let it go." She didn't let it go. 2 days later, I received a cease and desist letter from her attorney, claiming that the recall vote was conducted improperly and demanding it be overturned. Our lawyer responded with a detailed rebuttal, and we filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent Deborah from taking any actions as HOA president while the matter was being resolved. The judge who heard our petition was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who clearly had no patience for HOA drama. She reviewed the evidence, asked a few pointed questions, and granted our restraining order. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, "you are hereby prohibited from acting in any capacity as president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association until this matter is fully resolved. If you violate this order, you will be held in contempt." Deborah looked like she wanted to argue, but her lawyer put a hand on her arm and shook his head. We held elections for a new board the following month. I was elected president, Rachel became vice president, and Marcus took the treasurer position. We rounded out the board with 3 other homeowners who'd been active in the recall effort. Our first action was to review all the rules and regulations. We eliminated the ridiculous ones, like the generator noise ordinance that had started this whole mess, and kept the reasonable ones that actually maintained property values. We set up a formal appeals process so homeowners could challenge violations they felt were unfair. We also went through the HOA's finances, and that's when things got really interesting. Marcus came to my house on a Tuesday evening, looking troubled. "We need to talk about the books." "What's wrong?" He spread a series of printouts across my kitchen table. "There are some irregularities. Large cash withdrawals with vague descriptions. Payments to vendors I can't verify. It's not adding up." I looked over the documents. He was right. Over the past 3 years, approximately $80,000 had gone missing from the HOA's accounts. "We need to bring in a forensic accountant," I said. We hired a professional, and what she uncovered was damning. Deborah had been embezzling from the HOA for years. She'd set up fake vendor accounts, paid herself consulting fees for work she never did, and simply withdrawn cash with made-up justifications. "This is criminal," the accountant told us. "You need to report this to the police." I didn't want to. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy for Deborah. She was a petty tyrant, sure, but sending her to jail seemed extreme, Marcus had no such qualms. She stole from all of us, from Grace, who's on a fixed income, from the Hendersons, who just had a baby. She needs to face consequences. He was right. We filed a report with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, life in Meadowbrook Estates improved dramatically. Violation notices dropped by 90%. The few we did send out were for actual problems, like someone who let their yard become genuinely overgrown or a homeowner who started an unlicensed auto repair business in their garage. People actually smiled and waved when they saw me now. The neighborhood felt like a community instead of a prison. Then the charges came down. Deborah Patterson was indicted on 8 counts of embezzlement, 4 counts of fraud, and 2 counts of forgery. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a sharp young woman named Jennifer Kozlowski, who called me to go over the evidence. "We've got her dead to rights," she said. "The paper trail is extensive. She wasn't even careful about hiding it. What kind of sentence are we looking at?" "Depends on whether she takes a plea deal. If she goes to trial and loses, she could face up to 15 years. 15 years seemed excessive for what amounted to white-collar crime, but I kept that thought to myself. Deborah had made her choices. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later. In the meantime, Deborah tried to contact me several times. I ignored her calls and messages. She finally showed up at my house again, looking haggard and desperate. "Please," she said when I opened the door. "I need you to drop the charges." "I can't do that. It's out of my hands now. The state is prosecuting. You could tell them you don't want to pursue it. Deborah, you stole $80,000 from your neighbors, from people who trusted you. I'll pay it back, every penny. Just please, I can't go to prison." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You should have thought about that before you committed fraud." She started crying, big heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "My husband left me, did you know that? 2 years ago. He took everything. The HOA was all I had left. I just needed the money to survive." There are legal ways to survive. Getting a job, for instance. "I'm 56 years old. Nobody wants to hire me. I'm sorry, Deborah, I really am, but I can't help you." She wiped her eyes and straightened up, some of her old fire returning. "You'll regret this, all of you." I closed the door and watched through the window as she walked to her car. I did feel bad, but not bad enough to let her off the hook. The trial started on a Monday in late spring. I attended every day, along with Rachel and Marcus. The prosecutor laid out a methodical case, showing transaction after transaction, each one clearly fraudulent. Deborah's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, a lonely woman who'd made mistakes, but it didn't hold water against the evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The judge gave Deborah 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. She also ordered full restitution of the $80,000, plus interest. Deborah broke down completely when the sentence was read. Her attorney had to support her as she was led away by bailiffs. I watched her go and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that it was over. Satisfaction that justice had been served. And yes, a little bit of guilt that my complaint about a generator had led to this woman going to prison. But as Rachel pointed out when we talked about it later, I hadn't forced Deborah to embezzle. I hadn't made her abuse her power or treat her neighbors like subjects instead of equals. She'd done all of that herself. Life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a new normal. We used the restitution money to make actual improvements to the community. We renovated the playground, repaved several streets that needed it, and set up an emergency fund for future repairs. I served as HOA president for 2 years before stepping down. I'd accomplished what I set out to do, creating a fair and reasonable system of governance. Rachel took over after me, and she's done an excellent job. The generator ordinance never came back. We established sensible noise guidelines that applied to all equipment, not just generators, and enforced them consistently. When the next major storm hit, about a year after Deborah's trial, generators hummed throughout the neighborhood without anyone complaining. Tom thanked me one day for everything that had happened. "You could have just paid the fine or fought Deborah quietly," he said. "Instead, you actually fixed the problem." "I just wanted things to be fair," I said. "Well, they are now, thanks to you. I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. It's a good neighborhood, genuinely good now. People look out for each other. The rules make sense. And if someone's generator is a little loud during a power outage, we just close our windows and remember that we're all in this together." The whole experience taught me something important about standing up to bullies, even ones who hide behind official titles and bureaucratic rules. Deborah had counted on people being too tired, too busy, or too scared to fight back. And for years, that strategy had worked. But it only takes one person to say enough. One person to document the hypocrisy, to organize the opposition, to follow through when it gets difficult. I happen to be that person for Meadowbrook Estates, but I think there's a potential reformer in every oppressed HOA community. Sometimes I drive past Deborah's old house. A nice young family bought it at auction after she lost everything. They have 2 kids who play basketball in the driveway, something Deborah would never have allowed because of noise and traffic concerns. The parents wave when they see me, and the kids always ask if I want to join their game. That's what a community should be. Not a place where one person's vision of perfection is enforced on everyone else, but a place where people can live their lives with reasonable consideration for their neighbors. My quiet generator sits in the garage, ready for the next emergency. I've used it a dozen times since I bought it, and it's never caused a single complaint. That $3,000 turned out to be one of the best investments I ever made, not because of the generator itself, but because of everything it set in motion. Marcus jokes that I should write a book about HOA reform. "You could make millions," he says. "Every neighborhood in America has a Deborah." He's probably right. But I'm content just living in a place where I can park my car in my driveway, paint my shutters whatever shade of white I want, and run my generator when the power goes out without worrying about petty tyrants and their arbitrary rules. The last time I saw Deborah was at her sentencing. She looked broken, defeated, nothing like the imperious woman who'd ruled Meadowbrook Estates with an iron fist. Part of me wished things had turned out differently for her. But a larger part remembered Grace's shaking voice on the phone, the Hendersons' $8,000 paint job, and all the other people who'd suffered under Deborah's regime. Justice isn't always pretty, and it doesn't always feel good, but it's necessary. As I write this, it's been 5 years since that first power outage, since that first violation notice on my door. Deborah is up for parole next year. I hope she's learned something from her time in prison. I hope she understands that power without accountability inevitably leads to corruption, and that treating people with respect isn't just good ethics, but good policy. I'll probably never know if she's learned those lessons. She'll move away when she's released, start over somewhere far from Charlotte and the neighborhood she once dominated. That's fine. Meadowbrook Estates has moved on without her. We're stronger now, more united, more engaged. Our HOA meetings actually tackle real issues instead of serving as platforms for one person's petty grievances. Homeowners attend because they want to, not because they're afraid of being fined if they don't. And my generator, that beautiful, whisper-quiet machine, sits ready in my garage. I test it monthly, change the oil regularly, and keep it fueled. Not because I'm worried about HOA violations, but because it's the responsible thing to do when the next storm comes, and there will always be a next storm. I'll be ready. And so will my neighbors, loud generators and all. Because in a real community, you help each other through the dark times instead of using those times to assert dominance. That's the real story here. Not about generators or decibel levels or even HOA corruption. It's about what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough and work together to create something better. Meadowbrook Estates isn't perfect. We still have disagreements and debates, but they're honest disagreements handled with transparency and respect, the way things should be. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I sit on my porch and look at the neighborhood I helped reform. Kids ride bikes in the street. Neighbors chat across property lines. Someone 3 houses down has their music playing a little too loud, but nobody's calling the HOA to complain. We're all just living our lives. That's worth more than any perfectly manicured lawn or strictly enforced covenant. It's worth the $3,000 I spent on a generator. It's worth the months of organizing and fighting and dealing with Deborah's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. It's worth everything. My phone rings, pulling me from my thoughts. It's Rachel, calling about next week, HOA meeting. We've got a request from the Thompsons to approve their fence design, she says, and someone wants to discuss adding speed bumps on Willow Street. Actual issues, I say. What a concept, she laughs. Remember when our biggest concern was whether someone's mailbox was the approved shade of black? I try not to. See you Tuesday. I'll be there. I hang up and go back to enjoying the evening. Tomorrow I'll prepare for the meeting, review the Thompsons' fence plans, and consider the merits of speed bumps. Tonight, I'm just going to enjoy living in a neighborhood that finally makes sense. The generator hums quietly in my memory, a reminder of how small things can spark big changes. Deborah banned generators over a certain decibel level, so I bought a quieter one. And in doing so, I discovered that her whole system was built on hypocrisy and theft. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of working things out. You set out to solve one problem and end up fixing a dozen others you didn't even know existed. I wouldn't change any of it. Not the expense, not the conflict, not even the guilt I occasionally feel about Deborah's fate. It all led here, to this moment, to this community that actually functions the way communities should. And if another power outage happens tomorrow, my generator will be ready. Quiet, efficient, and completely compliant with sensible noise standards that apply to everyone equally. That's all I ever wanted. That's all any of us should want. Fairness, consistency, and the freedom to live our lives without petty tyrants making up arbitrary rules. Meadowbrook Estates has that now, and we're never going back.